Rajul, Rajul meaning actually foot. And it probably was a term to refer to the foot soldier, infantry. And so you just called a man a fighter, right? Once he becomes fighting age, he's a man. We have another inscription, which is very fun. It is an oath be and a god called Yaghuth. Yaghuth. And Yaghuth, which is very fun. This god is known from personal names elsewhere. But Yaghuth is a deity that appears in the Quranic retelling of Noah. So in the Quran, Noah's folk are destroyed. And it's different than in the Bible where, the motivation for God destroying Noah's folk is because they're worshiping idols. Okay? And then the Quran lists the idols they worshipped, names them. Wad, Ya'uq, Nisr, Suwa', and one of them is called Yaghuth. I didn't put them in the right order. I wanted to end with Yaghuth. All of these deities are very ancient, and they've been found all over Arabia. And now we have an inscription invoking Yaghuth in this newly deciphered inscription and corpus. So we see that god meant, so the Quran conceives it as a god from Noah's time. Here it is, what worshipped in this period, in this area. So it's really the amount of stuff, basically writing, like I said, these inscriptions are our window into the past. Okay? Because all the gods that Noah's people are worshiping are Arabian deities. Okay? Gotcha. Very, very interesting. Wad was a deity of ancient Yemen, worshipped by the Manaeans. Nisr, you have him at Hatra, Beth Arbaya, northern Mesopotamia, but also Nisr is mentioned at least in some ancient South Arabian texts. Suwa', this deity Suwa' is attested once in Central Arabia. Ya'uq has not appeared yet, but considering the track record, he probably will appear sooner or later. And Yaghuth, now we have the first true invocation to Yaghuth in Oman, which is really interesting. So indeed, we see that the tradition, the flood story has been, the flood story is adapted over and over and over again. And in the Quranic adaptation, the flood story is Arabianized. And his folk are worshiping Arabian deities, right? Which is really, really interesting. But by the Quran's time, it's very clear these deities are defunct. People are not worshiping them anymore, obviously. If you're going to put them in Noah's time to the audience will know that they used to be worshipped, but that they belong to the past. One thing that also is important is personal names. Personal names are archaic. We are often named after people, which means that the personal names don't necessarily reflect the ideology of the world you're in, but the world that was, because they're traditional in that way, they're passed down. So that's why you can have Christians with a name named after Dionysus.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is not a problem. So we have this beautiful Paleo-Arabic text from Burayra. This is west of Tabuk. The writer of this text is probably someone from further south, someone around Mecca. And there are lots of good arguments for that, and we can get into that in another interview, or we can go look at the article that deals with it. But this guy, his name is Abd Shams. Abd Shams. And Abd Shams means slave of the sun. The sun is the deity, not someone who enjoys a good tan, but someone who's really worshiping the sun. Slave of the sun. Abd Shams, son of Al-Mughira. So another man called Al-Mughira. So this individual seems to be someone we know. Okay, Abd Shams bin Al-Mughira. And then he begins his inscription, though, with Bismika Allahumma, in your name, O Allah. Okay, so he has this devotional introduction to a deity called Allah, but then his name is Abd Shams. And then the end of the inscription is very nice. He says, Yastaghfiru Rabbah. He seeks the forgiveness of his Lord. His Lord, of course, going back to Allah. Can we, based on his name, assume that he was also devoted to the sun? I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say based on his name that we could do that. Right. I would say that this person may have had an ancestor, or may was named after someone in the past. There are many ways in which someone can have the name Abd Shams. And it doesn't mean that he is actively the worshiper of the Shams, of the sun. You know what I mean? It could just be, you need to get rid of names like that. You need to have a culture that cares about the etymology of names and then makes them taboo. And that culture is something that seems to be introduced by Muhammad and his ministry. That's when it seems to be introduced. It doesn't seem to exist earlier. So,
You get this in the Bible too with Baal.
yeah,
No longer is my name Bali, but you
yes,
shall call me, you know what I mean? Father,
absolutely, yeah.
Ishi. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But what happens though is when you have names that are sort of snapshots of earlier belief systems, I mean, obviously, Abd Shams, if you got a guy called Abd Shams, you know that somebody used to worship the sun. I mean, it's very obvious. And in fact, we see people in the Muslim tradition. There is an antiquarian called Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, and he wrote a book on ancient gods. And one of the ways he figured out what people used to worship was looking at names. And he says, for example, I had this name Abdurudal, and I suppose Rudal was a god because you have the name slave of Rudal, but I've never heard of anyone worshiping him. I mean, I've not heard of the deity anywhere, but I suppose it is a deity. You see what I mean? So, names function that way too, which is very interesting. You can actually use them as a way of learning about the past.